Montana Territory, 1878. The sun had barely crested the eastern ridge when Lawson Neal spotted the girl crouched behind his barn, caked in trail dust, blood on her lip, and a Colt .45 gripped tight in her shaking hands. He raised his rifle, slow and steady. "You planning to shoot or just hold that for comfort?" She looked up, eyes wild, and for a second he thought she might squeeze the trigger. But then her shoulders dropped and the gun lowered with them. "I ain't here to steal," she said, her voice cracked like dry wood. "Just needed a place to breathe." Lawson scanned her boots, too big, coat torn at the elbow, a burn on her wrist shaped like a cattle brand, but her eyes, they were clear, tired but clear. "You got a name?" he asked, not lowering the rifle yet. "Della Orvin." He sighed, lowered the gun. "You hungry, Della?" She nodded once, almost too proud to admit it. Lawson jerked his head toward the house. "Well then, let's get you fed." His ranch sat 9 miles south of Helena, tucked between dry grass hills and the edge of the tree line. It was a quiet place, meant for a quiet life, until this girl showed up with a thief's brand and a story in her eyes she had not told yet. Inside, the kitchen smelled of last night's beans. Lawson handed her a plate without asking questions. She ate like someone who had not seen a full meal in days. When she finished, she leaned back and looked at him, jaw set. "I did not steal that horse, or the money. They just needed to blame someone when the foreman's son went missing." Lawson studied her face. "You running from someone, sheriff from Fort Benton." "And anyone else he lied to," he nodded slowly. "You got folks, none that want me back." Lawson rubbed his brow. He had not meant to get involved. He had cattle to move and fences to mend. But something about her, something in the way she held that pistol like it, was the only thing keeping her alive, stuck with him. "I do not take in runaways," he said carefully. Della stood, fire back in her eyes. "Then I will be on my way." "I did not say I was sending you off either." He held her gaze. "You shoot. I can aim, not well. Then you learn. I will teach you." She squinted at him. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because I have known what it means to be blamed for something you did not do. And because you look like you are about to get yourself killed out there." She sat back down. Lawson had always figured he would marry young, raise a couple boys, settle into being like his father had been, steady and quiet. But his wife had gone with the fever 3 winters ago, and the boys he never had stayed, just shadows in his mind. Della slept in the barn the first 3 nights. She would not come in the house, no matter how cold it got. Lawson did not press her. He left a blanket and food each night. By the 4th, she was standing in the doorway, hat in her hands. "I will not stay long," she said. "You stay until you can defend yourself," he said. "Long as that takes." They trained behind the barn. Lawson set up bottles on fence posts, watched her miss every one her first day. She cursed under her breath, but never gave up. By the 3rd day, she hit 2. By the end of the week, she was faster than he expected. "You keep this up," he said. "You will shoot straighter than any son I never had." She looked over at him, something soft flickering in her eyes. "You ever want one?" He nodded. "I did." They went quiet after that, but something shifted. She started helping around the ranch, feeding the horses, patching the chicken wire, checking the traps. She moved like someone who had worked hard her whole life but never had a place to rest. One morning, Lawson found her sitting on the porch with his old rifle across her knees. She looked different in the light, less hunted. "I used to be good," she said quietly. "Had a job in Fort Benton washing dishes, saved up for a saddle. Then that boy went missing, and folks said I must have taken the horse and money. He turned up 3 days later, drunk in the next town over, but the sheriff already had me branded." Lawson sat next to her. "I do not know how to be anything else now," she whispered. "You are not a thief, Della," she blinked. "You sound sure. Because I see you, you are strong, honest. You just need someone to believe it." She turned toward him then, really turned. "Why are you being kind to me?" Lawson looked at her, steady. "Because you deserve better than what the world handed you." She stared at him, her jaw trembling. You keep saying things like that, I might start to believe them. He reached out, touched her hand. She did not pull away. That night, she moved into the house. No words were said about it. She just set her bag by the door and took her plate at the table like she belonged. A few weeks later, a rider came down the trail. Lawson saw the dust long before the man reached the gate. He stepped outside, rifle in hand. The sheriff from Fort Benton dismounted, boots crunching gravel. "I am looking for a runaway," he said. "Della Orvin, she is wanted." Lawson kept his voice calm. "She is not here." The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "You sure about that?" Lawson stepped closer. "You just turned your horse around, Sheriff. No one here by that name." "No one you need to bother." The sheriff took a long look at the barn, then the house. "You harboring a criminal, I will come back with a badge and 5 more men." "You do that," Lawson said, "but bring a coffin too." The sheriff rode off. Della watched from the window, hands clenched. "You did not have to lie," she said later. "I did not lie," Lawson said. "You are not the girl he is looking for anymore. You are better now." She stepped closer. "Because of you," he looked down at her. "Because you let yourself grow." She reached up and touched his face, fingers light. "Lawson," he swallowed. "Yeah, I think I am falling for you." He smiled, slow and honest. "Then we are in the same trouble." And she kissed him out there on the porch with the wind picking up and the sun dropping low behind the hill. She fit against him like she had always belonged. And for the first time in a long while, Lawson felt like maybe he had a future after all. The creek behind the north pasture had swelled with the melt, its banks soft and black underfoot. Della stood knee-deep in the water, trousers rolled and boots on the bank, holding a pail in one hand and her hem in the other. Lawson watched from the fence line, one boot braced against the lower rail, arms crossed, the brim of his hat shading his face. "You trying to catch fish with that pail or just baptize it?" he called out. "Water tastes better when you get it yourself," Della replied, steady and dry. "Not sure you'd know that, seeing as you send me out here every morning." "I recall asking you once," Lawson said, hopping down. "You never stopped." She poured the chilled water into the barrel at the corner of the shed, then dried her hands on her thighs. Her fingers were pink from the cold. He didn't miss the way she flexed them after. "Snow'll be back in 2 months," he said. "Creek'll ice over sooner than that." "You'll need gloves." "I had a pair," she murmured, not looking at him. "Left behind." He waited, but she didn't offer more. They walked back together, side by side, the silence easy between them now. The wind tugged at her braid. His coat brushed hers when their strides matched. Inside, the kettle hissed low on the stove. Lawson poured 2 cups without asking, and they sat at the table, both lingering, both pretending they didn't notice. Della traced the rim of her cup. "You ever think of leaving?" Lawson shook his head. "Left once. Rode south when I was 20. Got as far as Nebraska before I missed the sound of wind through pine and the taste of spring water." She sipped carefully. "I used to think the further I got, the better I'd be, but every time I ran, I ended up smaller than I started." "You stopped running," he said. "Not sure I did." She met his eyes. "Just ran into something I didn't want to leave." His throat tightened. "Tell me what you need, Della." "I need to stop waking up thinking someone's gonna drag me back," she said. "I need to believe I'm more than what they claimed." "You are." "I want to believe that when I walk down into town, folks'll look at me and see a woman, not a warning." "You will," he said, then quieter, "not because they change. Because you did." She didn't answer, but her eyes held something new. That afternoon, they rode out to check the western boundary. The snowmelt had loosened the fence posts, and one steer had found its way halfway into the woods. Della coaxed it back with a switch and a low whistle, her horse taking to her like it had known her longer than a month. "You ever break a horse?" Lawson asked as they rode back. "No, but I've been thrown by one. That count twice." She gave a quiet laugh, the first from deep in her belly he'd heard. It stirred something in him he hadn't let rise in years, something warm and steady. They dismounted near the barn, and Lawson began replacing a warped rail. Della fetched the hammer without being asked, held the nails in her palm as he worked. "You think the sheriff will ride back through?" she asked, eyes on the road. "If he does, he won't find what he's looking for." She hesitated. "I don't want you in trouble. I've been in worse for less reason." He looked up then, met her gaze. "You're not trouble." She stepped closer. "You keep saying things like that. I might start acting like it." He didn't touch her, just looked, just let the air between them speak. She didn't move away. That night, she didn't wait for him to light the lantern. She did it herself. Set the table. Ladled soup into bowls. They ate in silence until she said, "There's a church social in town this weekend." Lawson raised an eyebrow. "You planning to go?" "I don't know." She twisted her spoon. "Maybe if you'd walk in with me." He didn't answer right away. Then, "If I walk in, I won't walk out alone." She looked up, startled, then nodded. Once, the fire cracked behind them and the wind rattled the eaves. But inside, everything held steady. After she cleared the dishes, she stood beside him at the hearth. "I used to think love was a trick," she said. "A thing folks pretended at to get what they wanted. And now," she turned her face to his, "now I think it might be a kind of work. A choice." He reached for her hand, calloused and rough like his. "Then let's choose it," he said. And she didn't answer with words, just leaned her head to his shoulder and let herself be still. The moon rose over the ridge, and for the first time in years, there was no running left to do. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp soil as they rode into town for the first time together. Della's hands stayed still at her sides, but Lawson could see the tension in her neck, the way her head stayed high while her gaze flicked from storefront to porch to the faces they passed. No one stopped them. A few nodded to Lawson, a few glanced at Della and looked away again, uncertain. But no fingers pointed. No voices rose. They tied their horses outside the mercantile, and Lawson held the door for her without a word. Inside, the air was warm with wood smoke and molasses. The shelves were stacked high with flour sacks, lantern oil, bolts of cloth, and a quiet kind of order. "I'll see if Tom's got that wire," Lawson said. "You need anything?" She glanced at a row of sewing needles. "Maybe half a yard of canvas." "Mine's tearing through at the seams." He gave a short nod and stepped toward the back. Della moved slowly, careful not to brush too close to anyone. The shopkeep, a woman in her 50s with a silver braid and wide hands, looked up from behind the counter. "You're Neil's girl." Della didn't flinch. "I work his land." The woman narrowed her eyes, not unkindly. "You sew?" "Well enough." She cut the cloth without comment, folded it sharp and handed it over. No questions, no coins asked. When they stepped back outside, the street had begun to fill with wagons and riders gathering for the social. A fiddler tuned his instrument near the church steps. Children chased each other past the water trough, boots kicking up dust and laughter. "You all right?" Lawson asked, adjusting the strap on his saddlebag. She nodded once. "Feels strange, standing still. That'll pass." They didn't linger. They stayed long enough for Della to buy a spool of coarse thread and for Lawson to shake hands with the feed store owner, then turned back up the trail before the sun dipped too low. The mountains to the west were already rimmed in gold. That night, Della sat by the open window with her sewing in her lap. Her lips moved as she counted stitches, eyes narrowed with focus. Lawson watched from the table, oil lamp casting a soft glow over her profile. "You always mend things yourself?" he asked. "If I can." "You ever think about making something new instead?" She looked up. "Like what?" He leaned back in his chair. "Blanket, shirt, maybe a dress," she considered. "Never thought I'd stay in one place long enough to need one." "You are now." She set the fabric aside, stood and crossed to him. "I don't know what to do with comfort," she said quietly. "It feels like a trap sometimes." "It's not," he said. "It's just waiting." "For what?" "For you to trust it." She touched his arm. "I trust you." He stood, close enough that she had to tilt her head to meet his eyes. "You don't have to earn your place here," he said. "You already have it." "I used to dream about someone saying that," she whispered. Didn't believe it had ever come. His fingers brushed her cheek. It has. She kissed him then, slower than before. No urgency, just heat, steady and sure, like a fire built right. Later, when the kettle cooled and the stars took the sky, she lay beside him with her hand resting over his heart. I want to build something here, she said. Not just stay. We will, he said, bit by bit. Outside, the horses shifted in the barn and the wind slid soft through the grass. Inside, the quiet wasn't empty, it was full of breath and promise and the weight of something lasting. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. The morning after their ride into town, Della woke before the light. The floorboards chilled her bare feet as she crossed the room, careful not to wake Lawson. His breath was even, one arm across the quilt, the other tucked beneath his pillow. At the basin, she rinsed her hands and stared out the window. Mist clung low to the earth, softening the edges of the fence posts and the tops of the grass. A fox trotted along the tree line, barely visible in the pale gray. Behind her, the bed creaked gently. You always wake up this early. Lawson's voice was thick with sleep. Della kept her eyes on the window. Only when I've got something on my mind. He sat up, quilt falling to his waist. What is it? She hesitated. There's a man used to work the quartermaster's stable in Fort Benton. Name was Barrick. He saw what happened, saw I hadn't touched a damn thing. But he kept quiet. Lawson rubbed his jaw. Why bring him up now? Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life hiding from a lie. I want it buried proper. He stood, crossed to her, and set a hand on her shoulder. You want to ride back, she nodded without turning. Not to get even. Just to ask him why. By noon, they had saddled the horses and packed food enough for 2 days. The ride would take them east through the low country, past the river basin and into flatter land. They didn't speak much on the trail. There wasn't need. The rhythm of the hooves and the whistle of the wind through the scrub filled the silence. That night, they camped along a shallow bend in the Maria's River. Della collected driftwood while Lawson pitched the canvas. She built the fire with practiced hands, coaxing it to life with dry bark and flint. When the flames caught, she sat back on her heels and said, You think folks like Barrick ever think about what they leave behind them? Lawson stirred the beans heating in the pan. Some do, most don't. They figure if it doesn't bleed them, it isn't theirs to carry. She nodded slowly. He was kind once. Gave me a pair of gloves when the frost split my hands that first winter. Then the day things turned, he wouldn't even look at me. Lawson handed her the tin plate. What will you say if he's still there? Della stared into the fire. I don't know yet. They ate quietly, the fire popping between them. When the stars came out, she lay against her saddle, arms folded beneath her head. Lawson sat nearby, sharpening his blade by firelight. He might not be there, she said. I know. And if he is, he might not talk. Then we ride home. She looked at him. It feels strange, having a place to ride back to. He didn't respond right away. Then, without looking up, he said, That place has your name on the land now, Della. Whether you stay or not, she closed her eyes. I'll stay. They reached Fort Benton the next afternoon. The town was busier than she remembered. Wagons lined the main road, and a steamboat sat moored at the riverbank, unloading crates with the help of sweating dockhands. Della kept her hat low and her coat drawn tight. Lawson led the way through the winding streets, past the smithy and the grain warehouse, until they reached the stables behind the old quartermaster's post. A man stood near the corral, pitchfork in hand, his back stooped and hair thinner than she recalled. Barrick. Della dismounted. Lawson stayed with the horses. She walked to the fence, hands in her coat pockets. You remember me? Barrick turned, startled. His eyes widened, then narrowed. You're her. I am. He looked around, cautious. You shouldn't be here. I didn't come for trouble, she said. I came for the truth. He set the pitchfork down slowly. You want me to say I lied? No, she said. I want to know why you didn't speak up. He wiped a hand across his mouth. Wasn't safe, for you, for anyone. The sheriff's boy, his uncle, runs the freight line. They could have ruined me. She stepped closer. So you let them ruin me instead. Beric didn't answer. She took a breath. I'm not here to shame you. I just needed to hear it from you, not the sheriff. Not the town. You. He looked away. You have a daughter, she asked. His eyes came back to hers, sharp. 2. Then think what it'd mean to them if someone did to them what you let happen to me. Beric's mouth twitched, not in anger, but grief. I think about that more than you know. She nodded once, turned, and walked back to Lawson. They rode out before the sun dipped behind the courthouse steeple. They didn't speak until the town was far behind them, the trail quiet again. Did it help? Lawson asked. Della looked ahead, wind tugging at her collar. It didn't fix anything, but it settled something. They reached the ranch 2 days later. The sky was clear, the air carried the first hint of autumn. Della unpacked slowly, her movements thoughtful, like she was setting each thing in its rightful place. That evening, as the fire glowed low in the hearth, Lawson reached into the drawer near the stove and pulled out a worn ledger. I've been thinking, he said, laying it on the table. If we're going to build something, we ought to start writing it down. She looked up. Like what? He opened to the first page. Names, stock, boundaries, and yours next to mine. Her voice was quiet. You mean that? He met her eyes. I wouldn't say it if I didn't. She stepped to him, placed her hand over his. Then write it. And he did. In his neat, steady hand next to his own name, he wrote hers. The ink dried slow in the lamplight. Outside, the wind had quieted. The land, at last, felt like it was holding its breath in peace. The first frost came early that year, settling over the fields in a silver hush. Della stepped out just after dawn, shawl wrapped tight, drawn to the stillness the way she used to be drawn to escape. But she wasn't running anymore. The land beneath her boots felt steady, like it had accepted her weight. Lawson joined her with his hands in his pockets, eyes on the line of pale light cresting the far hill. He didn't speak. He never did first, not when the morning was still wearing its quiet. She turned to him. I want to file a land claim. He didn't look surprised, only nodded once, slow. You've been thinking on it since we came back. She brushed her thumb against her palm. You said this place has my name on it. I want to make that true in more than ink. He studied her face. There's a parcel just east of the ridge. Used to be part of my father's range. It's been empty near 10 years. Would you let it go? I'd rather give it. They rode out that afternoon, past the upper grove where the cottonwoods bent low over the stream. The land she chose sloped gentle toward the trees, with enough flat for a cabin and room to plant. She walked its edge, boots sinking into the frost-softened grass, and stopped near a cluster of stones half buried beneath the earth. This is the spot, she said. Lawson dismounted and joined her. You sure? She looked at him. I'm sure. They spent the next week splitting timber, hauling stone from the creek, marking corners with twine. Della worked alongside him, never asking what job was hers or his. The rhythm came natural. At night, they returned to the house, fingers raw, backs aching, and still they found space to touch small, quiet gestures that spoke of certainty more than longing. One evening, as she stirred the stew, Lawson leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. You ever think about marriage? She didn't flinch. I have. He stepped inside. What you decide? That if I did it again, it'd be for more than a name. It'd be because I trusted the man enough to build something that outlives us both. Lawson nodded. Then maybe it's time you know something. He pulled a small wrapped bundle from the shelf and set it on the table. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a ring, simple silver, the band worn smooth. My mother's, he said. My father gave it to her when they built this place. She wore it through every hard season they had. Della touched the band. You're sure? I've been sure since the day you didn't flinch when I told you the truth mattered more than fear. She looked at him, eyes steady. Then yes. They were married in November, just before the first heavy snow. The preacher came from Helena, bundled in a wool coat and carrying a weathered Bible. The ceremony was held beneath the cottonwoods, with only the horses and a pair of neighbor families to bear witness. No lace, no ribbons. Just her in her best blue dress, him in his Sunday coat, and vows spoken with no hesitation. That night they sat close by the hearth, the fire low and warm. She rested her head against his shoulder. "Wasn't sure I'd ever be someone's wife again," she said. "You're not just someone's," he answered. "You're mine, and I'm yours." She closed her eyes. It feels good, saying it like that. Their days settled into a rhythm. The cabin on her claim rose beam by beam, and though she planned to spend the spring tending her own land, she returned to the ranch house each evening. They shared meals, mended tools, and sometimes just sat, saying nothing, letting the silence between them feel full and lived in. By late winter, she had a flock of hens and 2 goats, and the beginnings of a garden marked out beneath the snow. Lawson built her a cedar chest for seed sacks and wrapped her hands in sheepskin when the wind bit hard. The sheriff from Fort Benton never came back. Word had spread about the truth of the boy's disappearance, and with Berwick's quiet confession sent by mail weeks after their visit, Della's name was no longer whispered behind closed doors. Folks in town greeted her by name now, not with caution, but with respect. In March, she stood on her porch and watched Lawson ride up the hill, snow melting in patches behind him. He dismounted without a word, stepped up beside her, and took her hand. "Garden's ready," she said. He kissed her palm. "So are we." They planted together that spring, hands in the dirt, shoulders brushing. She laughed when the goats ate the edge of her skirt. He carved a bench for the porch, and they sat there often, watching the seasons turn. Years passed, and the land remembered them. The house stood firm. The barn filled. Friends came and stayed. And through it all, they held on 2 people who had once weathered storms alone, now facing every sunrise side by side. One warm summer evening, Della walked barefoot through the grass toward the ridge, the light soft on her skin. Lawson waited for her there, as he always did, his hands calloused, his eyes kind. "You ever wish things had gone different?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not once." "Not since you?" She leaned in, kissed him slow, and knew without fear or hesitation that this was the life she'd built, and the love that had built her back, and it would hold. Always.